I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. It could not be a busier day in the news today. Here in Rhode Island, we're expecting a major protest over at Textron headquarters, right across Turk's Head Plaza from GoLocal's headquarters downtown. Police have already arrived and are setting up sort of security areas to be able to deal with it. Providence Police tell us they're expecting a few hundred. Textron has been the focal point of a lot of protests related to the war between Hamas and Israel. Let's jump down to the University of Virginia. We've got Jennifer Lawless. She is the chair of the Political Science Department. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure.
Let's go kind of around the world. Let's start Tuesday night election results. It was kind of a bellwether early predictor for the 2024 presidential race. The hot spots were the governor's race in Kentucky, Ohio on abortion, and the control of the Virginia legislature, a real mix of different indicators. Walk us through those three election results.
Well, first, I would note the Democrats hope that it's a bellwether. The Republicans hope that it's not. So I think what happened on Tuesday is going to be a guide for Democrats moving forward. And if the Republicans know what's good for them, they should take lessons from it and try and move away from that heading into next November. But what we saw across the board was Democrats outperforming Republicans, regardless of whether it was a governor's race, down ballot state legislative contests, or even a ballot initiative. So in Kentucky, for example, Governor Beshear was reelected. It's odd to have a Democratic governor in a ruby red state, but he was reelected with a significantly larger margin than the margin with which he was originally reelected. In Ohio, we saw the vote to include a constitutional amendment to allow abortion win by about 11 points, again, in a very red state. And in Virginia, the Democrats not only held on to the state Senate, but they actually flipped the legislature, largely because they wanted to make sure that Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin had a check and was not going to be able to move forward with some of his plans, which included limiting abortion rights. So in all of these areas and in all of these races, abortion was front and center. It upped Andy Beshear's margin, it enshrined abortion rights in the Constitution, and it flipped a state legislature, which means that voters are still, even in Republican areas, very, very turned off by the Dobbs decision and willing to vote to make sure that women's reproductive freedom is a guarantee.
So I'm going to come back to Kentucky first in 1 second. Two terrible polls for Joe Biden. New York Times poll showing that him trailing functionally in 4 out of the 6 key swing states and really dead even in the other 2. And then subsequently on Monday, Tuesday, a CNN poll that also showed Donald Trump leading in a number of key areas. Loss of black support, loss of support by younger voters. Go back to Kentucky. Why is those Democrats in the smoky back room not calling up Andy Beshear and saying, you're our guy for president, you can turn the South blue potentially, and Joe, sorry, we appreciate your service to the country, thanks so much, here's your gold watch, take a back seat.
All right, look, there's no question that the New York Times poll was not good news for Joe Biden. But I would take election results over a hypothetical contest that's still 12 months away any day of the week. And
okay, but I want to pause right there. The problem, though, for Democrats isn't Democratic messaging, that the Republicans don't look crazy and out of step, and that the Democrats are able to take an advantage over on the issue of abortion. The problem is Joe Biden is too old. That's what voters consistently are saying over and over again.
It is what they're saying, except they're also saying that they would give Trump an advantage when it comes to the economy. They're saying that they don't see a big distinction between Biden and Trump when it comes to protecting American democracy. And they're saying that abortion rights are really important. So what I would take from the New York Times poll, which, by the way, we can quibble with, the sample is problematic. There's no way that young voters are actually splitting half and half, but it's certainly sending an important message. Like, it should not be this close. And if you're in the Biden camp, you should be worried. But this is not a situation, I don't think, where just substituting in a different Democrat makes everything go away. The Democrats nationally have to figure out how to message that the economy actually is strong, despite the fact that inflation and prices are higher than people want. They have to message nationally that abortion rights really are at stake, and remind people across the board that, abortion access is something that matters to everybody, and Democrats are the only ones that are going to protect it. And they have to highlight in a way that is a different message than they've already been, because it doesn't seem to be working, that electing Donald Trump would actually involve chipping away at democracy. The poll numbers indicate that their messages have not resonated. The one other thing I would note, though, is that the Biden campaign has not actively campaigned against Donald Trump yet. And it's also possible for people not to approve of the job the president is doing, but on election day, realize that they really have to vote for him anyway. The alternative is so much worse. Now, that's not great. That's not a perfect recipe.
You may not like us, but the other guy's way, way worse.
Look, at the end of the day, it's about who can get more votes. And at this point, there's nothing to suggest that Joe Biden is going to receive fewer votes than Donald Trump. A year out, pre-campaign, polls mean very little, except sending a strong message to the candidates about what they can and should do over the course of the next 12 months.
So Gary Sass, who I think you remember when you were up here at Brown University, he was head of RIPEC for a number of years. He was director of administration in the Kachuri administration, ran the Hassenfeld Institute up at Bryant University. He had a column this week in GoLocal saying it's cost of living stupid, pulling from James Carville and Bill Clinton's famous and victorious mantra that helped them beat George Bush back in the day. Isn't that the fundamental thing? We can talk about democracy, we can talk about foreign relations issue, we can talk about anything, but at the end of the day, Americans vote based on their pocketbook. And right now, it is clear, I don't care what poll, whose poll it is, Americans are not comfortable, rationally or irrationally, with their economic condition.
So generally speaking, that's right. And history suggests that that's true. That said, in 2022, people were very upset about their economic situation, and Republicans did far worse than they expected, and Democrats outperformed. In 7 special elections since 2020, when people's economic circumstances were not ideal, they still favored the Democrats. And on Tuesday night, when across the board, people are still not thrilled with what's going on and they think their cost of living is too difficult to manage, they elected Democrats. So I think we're in a little bit of a different era right now. And although the economy certainly matters, it's not just economic messages that get voters to the polls, and it's not just economic messages that shape for whom voters cast their ballots.
I just want to point out that Viola barks at you every time you make a point, but seems far more supportive when I'm speaking. I'm just making that point, and I'm not going to belabor it.
I think the squirrel on the patio might have a different view of what's going on.
It's you slanting the results of the polls. That's all I know. Viola, supportive of my comments, less supportive of your comments. Let's go back to Kentucky, though. Andy Beshear not only won, not only outperformed how he did 4 years ago, he beat a very viable black attorney, Republican attorney general, who may have misstepped on the issue of abortion issues, but was a very, very credible candidate who spent like $30 million. Isn't that an indication, though, that voters, Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, Andy Beshear down in Kentucky, they really like these young, kind of middle of the road, smart, articulate, common sense Democrats who can talk about a range of issues but don't look like progressives and don't look overly partisan?
Well, I'm not sure that Andy Beshear or Josh Shapiro would deem themselves, moderate or middle of the road. Certainly, Josh Shapiro is, pretty progressive. But I do think there is something to be said about how a Democrat gets elected in a red or a purple state. And it's different, and the temperament is different, and the issues are different, and the messaging is different than if you're trying to seek re-election on, New York's Upper East Side or in Los Angeles. So there's no question there. But I will say about Kentucky that it may very well be that the misstep was not only about abortion, but also about the extent to which Donald Trump is helpful. And one thing that the Republicans don't seem to understand is they keep embracing him, and it keeps hurting them.
Yeah.
So although his base is very, very solid, there doesn't seem to be any sort of coattail associated with his endorsement or his support of a candidate or of a candidate trying to align him or herself with Donald Trump. And again, this is one of these things where it's hard to see how many more times Republicans have to lose before they get that message.
It's just fear factor. I mean, clearly in Georgia's governor's race, you know, we can pick off the races around the country. The so-called Trump factor has been oftentimes a negative for Republican candidates. There are some exceptions, like in the Ohio Senate race, where his, you know, sort of somewhat handpicked candidate was victorious.
Sure, and a lot of it depends on who the Democratic opponent is.
Yeah.
But if you've got a Democratic incumbent who's doing a pretty decent job and who got elected 4 years ago, and you don't have much reason to throw him out, then it's unlikely that a Donald Trump endorsement is going to be what ultimately defeats him.
Let's jump over to sort of the politics of the Middle East right now and how that's playing out. GoLocal's been covering it here. There's a protest at Brown in the afternoon yesterday with very, very anti-Israel, anti-American language, claiming that both countries were guilty of genocide. Last night at Brown University, about 20 students were arrested. Today, there's a major protest planned. We'll see what the turnout is over at Textron. So just on a local standpoint, there's a lot of activities related to America's role, Israel's invasion into Gaza. How is this playing out across the country, and does it really matter to the presidential dynamics?
It's playing out around the country similar to the way that it's playing out in Rhode Island. And people are, on both sides, are very passionate. Now, it's not a huge number of people across the board, but it's a very active group who are either pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian, or you know, groups in between, or I guess not in between, further on each side, who are not only pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian, but anti the other side. And it's hard to know how this is going to play out. If the election for president were held tomorrow, I would say that Joe Biden probably has a problem with young voters who seem to have really glommed onto this issue and are, you know, prioritizing it in a way that we haven't seen foreign policy prioritized. But we also know that Americans have very short attention spans. And we also know that conflicts like this, if we look at history, tend not to last 11 or 12 months. And so I think depending on the outcome of the war, depending on whether we're talking about a week or 3 weeks or 3 months, it could ultimately have very little impact on the presidential election.
Let's jump over to last night's presidential debate on the Republican side. Who's the winner? Who's the big loser? And does it matter because they're all trailing Donald Trump by so much?
I think Nikki Haley was the big winner. This is now, she's had several consecutive debate performances where she's demonstrated quite a bit of knowledge, thoughtfulness. Even if you disagree with her even if you disagree with her positions, like, she's clearly thought about her positions. And she's remained relatively calm in the face of explicitly sexist attacks on the part of Vivek Ramaswamy. She's also been willing to say that Donald Trump has gotten things wrong, and she's been willing to credit him when he's gotten things right, according to her. So I think she's demonstrated an evenness and a thoughtfulness that will allow her to continue to be on that stage. The big loser last night was Vivek Ramaswamy. I don't understand what he's doing. The only thing he could possibly be doing is trying to run for vice president, and there's no way that Donald Trump is going to take a lesser version of himself and put him on the ticket. You don't go to a debate and in your opening statement bash the moderator and say that you wish it was Tucker Carlson instead. You don't go to a debate and challenge the RNC chair to come up on the stage and resign because she's a loser. You don't go to a debate and spend your entire time criticizing Nikki Haley, asking questions of the other candidates and the moderators, and then making a beeline off the stage to ensure that you don't have to actually look her in the eye. This is not presidential. It's not professional. And it's also highlighting how inexperienced he is and how this is really a waste of time for everybody to be spending even 7 or 8 minutes out of the 2 hours listening to him. We're not going to build a wall with Canada. We're not going to make abortion a men's issue. And frankly, we're not going to get into bed with Vladimir Putin. So I don't know who's advising him, but I would encourage that person to advise him to get out of the race and to do it fast.
Is Nikki Haley potentially a nightmare opponent for Joe Biden?
It's not good. I mean, look,
I think.
she's the next generation of leadership. She has quite a bit of foreign policy experience. She was a governor, which means she has executive experience. She's knowledgeable. Now, they're completely polar opposites on every issue. She has demonstrated a willingness to at least articulate a call for common ground on some very complex issues, which is something that Joe Biden has done too, so that might neutralize his ability to do that. But no, I don't think the Democrats should be excited and enthusiastic about running against her. That said, I still don't see a path. Donald Trump is so far ahead in all of the polls
Well,
nationally.
let's say he's
Well above
convicted of a
50%.
crime.
I'm sorry?
What if he's convicted of a crime?
I'm not sure that that matters. I'm not sure that if he's sitting in a prison cell, he wouldn't still run for president. I think the RNC's nightmare is he's convicted of a crime and he is the front runner and he gets to the convention with the number of delegates that would give him the nomination. I think they then have to decide what they're going to do. But I'm not sure that even if Nikki Haley is a solid second at that time, I'm not sure that the RNC would then decide to deem her the nominee. So it's a mess for them behind the scenes. But I do think that what we're seeing is, Chris Christie, Nikki Haley, and Ron DeSantis are all demonstrating a clear alternative to Donald Trump and doing it in a way that is far less harsh in rhetoric than he uses. I also think Tim Scott was a loser last night. He has not been able to gain any traction. He hasn't been able to position himself as a legitimate alternative to Donald Trump. And he hasn't articulated positions that are significantly different or that would resonate with the American people. He too doesn't belong on that stage.
Well, I'm going to go full John McLaughlin and say, Eleanor, you missed the big story, which is Youngkin's loss in Virginia knocked him out as a potential presidential candidate.
There is no question, and I can tell you that among some circles in Virginia yesterday, there was a little bit of celebration. I mean, look, Youngkin hoped, I think, that he was going to swoop in and save the Republican Party and provide this alternative because he outperformed expectations and won in 2021. On Tuesday night, he demonstrated that that was probably a result of COVID and the fact that people wanted their kids back in school and circumstances were awful. And the day before the election, Joe Manchin said the Democrats don't know how to govern. There was a confluence of factors that gave Youngkin that ability to eke out a victory. And those circumstances no longer exist. And as a result, Youngkin cannot position himself as a Republican governor in a blue state who was able to flip a legislature. So yeah, I think his presidential prospects are done.
Now, one other problem, lots of celebration on the Democratic side from those election results. One problem is their lack of control over progressive voices. Representative Tlaib out of Michigan was censored by the House. 22 Democrats joined with Republicans. 4 Republicans peeled off and did not vote for it, but 22 Democrats voted across your personal candidate, Seth Magaziner, the only member of the House presently from Rhode Island because of David Cicilline's resignation, did not vote to censure her. Talk about the implications, just pure Democratic politics, of a congressman from Rhode Island not voting with functionally a strong Israeli bloc.
Look, I think it's a really tough vote. And it's a tough vote because you don't want to go down the path of empowering a majority party, whether it's your own party or not, to censure members of Congress for different campaign activities or for expressing their views. By the same token, you also don't want to make it acceptable that a progressive Democrat is engaged in what most Jewish Americans would consider anti-Semitism, chanting, from the river to the sea, accusing Joe Biden of genocide because he's supporting the Israelis is not a mainstream position, and it's offensive to a lot of Jewish people. So it's a difficult position to be in because it's pitting free speech against, sort of a foreign policy position. And I don't envy any of the Democrats who had to cast those votes, because my hunch is that most of them thought it was a terrible thing that she did. But they're aware of the fact that by censuring her, they're empowering the Republicans to do that across the board to other people too. So it's very difficult.
So for viewers who are watching, I'm going to translate. the professor is giving a free pass to her guy, Seth Magaziner, here in Rhode Island.
I give up.
Gabe Amo wins. Gabe Amo wins the 1st Congressional District. It is a historic moment, first non-white ever elected to Congress from Rhode Island, about 100 preceding members of Congress between the House and Senate in Rhode Island's history. The first black man, the son of an African immigrant. It's a big historic moment. How does he make it more than a historic moment and really becomes an outstanding congressman for the state of Rhode Island?
Well, I think that he's going to have a lot of opportunities simply because he's young and he's a fresh face and he is progressive and he represents a block of the American people that have traditionally been underrepresented. So right off the bat, he has the possibility to make a national case for himself and for Rhode Island. That said, it's difficult to be a freshman member of Congress. I mean, Seth Magaziner is now the more senior member of the House, and he was elected 10 days ago. Being a little bit facetious, but still. So, I mean, the Rhode Island delegation has 2 pretty senior members in the Senate, but as far as the House is concerned, they're pretty much at the bottom of the, at the bottom of the ladder. So it's going to take time and it's going to take climbing that ladder. But, gaining policy expertise and, keeping his head down and just gaining a lot of experience is the way that you position yourself to quickly climb.
And how big a name can he be? No disrespect to Seth Magaziner, but I'm not seeing Seth Magaziner as the Speaker of the House in the long term. Could Gabe Amo, because of this story, because of how, that Democratic primary, we've sort of forgotten it, was a rock and sock'em robot, real live election, and he beat out a number of people who were expected to win that primary.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sky is the limit. I would also say that, like, on his first day in Washington, he probably shouldn't be figuring out how to become Speaker of the House. So, I don't know what's going to happen. We've also seen in Rhode Island, David Cicilline climbed that ladder pretty quickly, tried to get into the Democratic leadership, played a key role, in the impeachment hearings. Jim Langevin didn't do that. So there are different, recipes and there are different ways to represent or not represent your constituents. And I think that when you get there, rumor has it, because I don't know, you figure it out.
So Gabe Amo should not go over with a tape measure to Mr. Johnson's office and start measuring things.
I'd say wait till like March.
Wait till March. What should we be looking at? I mean, there is so much political chaos going on here in Rhode Island. It's playing out across the country. It's a global issue. It's hard to remember so many different moving pieces, all simultaneous. What should we be looking for in the next couple of weeks?
Well, I would say there are 2 things that I'm keeping my eye on. The first is the possibility that the government actually will shut down. Speaker Johnson was given a longer leash than I would have expected, and it doesn't seem that he really cares, right? It's unclear that he would suffer any major consequence if he cut a deal and actually worked with Democrats to keep the government open. It doesn't look like he's willing to do that. And time and again, the Republicans have been the ones to blame, and the Republicans have been responsible for government shutdowns, and Americans hate government shutdowns. So I'm following that. I don't know what he's going to do. The other thing is the Trump civil trial in New York. He took the stand on Monday and demonstrated that he was willing even to double down under oath. And what started out as what looked like the potential of $250 million in overvaluing his assets, by the time he got off the stand, it looked like he had overvalued his assets well over $350 million. So, he didn't distance himself from the documents the way that his sons did. He didn't suggest that he did anything wrong or take any responsibility, and he managed to alienate the judge. When a judge has to tell a lawyer, when a judge actually requests that a lawyer, tell his client how to behave, or else he will be removed from the courtroom and the judge will make every negative inference possible, that there's a problem. And so the Trump fortune was the basis of Trump's initial argument as to why he should become president. And so if that fortune is demolished, I'll be interested to see whether his base even cares.
Jennifer Lawless, she's the chair of the political science department at the University of Virginia. We always appreciate her insights in it's Thursday and it's already been a wild week in American politics. As always, thank you. For everybody else, stay tuned. We'll have coverage. We'll see what happens over at Textron's world headquarters. Textron is a conglomerate that owns numerous companies that are defense manufacturing suppliers, including sales to Israel. It's been targeted by by some who are opposed to this war in the Middle East and are identifying Textron as a part of the problem and causing them to be responsible for some elements of what they are calling genocide in Gaza. So we'll have coverage of it. It is literally right outside the doors of our offices. Providence Police are already there. 10 to 15 have lined up at about 9 o'clock this morning. I'm told that more Providence Police will be coming over prior to the beginning of this event, which is scheduled for 12 noon. You'll be able to, if it builds up, we'll cover it live. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll have more updates throughout the day.